All right, here we are again, and I am continuing to talk about the welfare and immigration issues that I am experiencing with a lot of the newcomers that I work with. So yesterday I was pretty fast talking, trying to do a video in a very short amount of time. 29 minutes felt like a short period of time for me to try to describe what I'm seeing that our clients are dealing with. I think I may have left some of this off and I may repeat some of this, so I apologize. All right, basically the welfare system that we have is not a great system, and I'm not sure what a good system would look like. I do think that there are some changes that need to happen, and probably even in the monitoring of how the funds are distributed, who monitors them, and how that exactly works, and how it directly impacts and affects the families, so that it would really benefit them in the best way, so that they would actually have some tools and some steps to be able to go forward in their process to a successful resettlement. Or with an American person, sorry, another airplane, but with an American person, that they would go forward and have some skills and some, a better avenue to be able to make the money that they need to be able to provide for themselves. So I think that the system is broken. These places that are contracted out to be able to sort of monitor whether or not a person is trying to do better and better themselves in a way that they could provide for themselves, whether it be take care of themselves at the doctor if there was a medical need that caused them to be in a situation where they needed help, or if they needed to have better English skills or job skills, or just something like that would help them. There is a way that the government tries to monitor that, and I'm imagining that they aren't able to handle all that themselves, so they contract it out. And then when it's contracted out, that's where I'm uncertain how well that's being monitored. There's so much paperwork involved in it, though, for even these organizations. There seem to be great people, for the most part, that we work with the government processing all this. Really seriously great people that also try to be very careful that people are not taking advantage of the system, but it's a very difficult process. Let me give you an idea of something that happened that I think that might kind of bring a smile to most American faces. We had a client that was receiving benefits, and her and her husband were going through some difficult times. So you got to remember, the people that enter into our country are going through life situations just like we are. So they may get pregnant, they may go through marital conflict and problems. You can imagine, if with all of the PTSD and all of the life changes and stuff, the kinds of stresses it might be on a marriage. So you may find some situations where families begin to kind of pull apart because of the stress, and who knows what could be going on. So this particular lady had a food stamp case, and her husband and her were not doing so great, so they decided to split up for a period of time to try to see if they could maybe work some things out. And in the midst of that, 6 months to a year of them splitting up, he wasn't living with her, and but they were still trying to work and manage to help the children. So he had her food stamp card, and he would occasionally go and drive, because she was unable to drive, to go and get the food stamps. But he went to one of these little stores, again, not trying to stereotype, but an Indian ran store. Somebody also running a business that may not understand how the system works, or they very well may understand how the system works, and they may be taking advantage of the vulnerable newcomers. But this kind of little store, family-owned store, was allowing people to go into the store and use their food stamp card to kind of flip it and get cash. So you can't, if you have a food stamp card, you have to use the card to buy food. And the person that swipes the card and uses the card should be somebody that's name is on the card. So if it was my card, it would be my responsibility to make sure that my card was being used well. Now, sometimes we know that people steal our identity and things like that, and somebody may get your card. But if I have handed it to my husband or my daughter or something like that, and they go and use it in some sort of wrong way, if they try to do that, the government is watching, and they will, they will eventually get caught, okay? And I want to tell you this because I think most Americans don't even realize how closely they're monitoring the food stamp system, and I think that you would be proud of your government in this regard, maybe. So this particular lady that was going through a marriage trouble had given her card to her separated husband. And apparently he was wanting to go and spend the card on some things other than food. So I won't get into the details of that, but he wanted cash for it so that he could buy other things that he may have needed, or maybe he didn't need it. So he was trying to figure out a way he could take some of that, food stamp money, and maybe he could use it for cash for something else that he needed. Food stamps only buy food. They don't buy toiletries. It doesn't buy diapers. It doesn't buy hair care products. It doesn't buy clothes. It doesn't buy paper products. Razor, doesn't buy that. So I won't get into the kinds of things that he may have needed, but it wasn't food. So he was talked to by one of the store clerks that said they would be willing to take his card, take money off of his card, and say that he bought food, and lie and say that he bought food in the amount of, let's say, $100 or $200, and then exchange it for cash for a small percentage and a fee. So doing that is illegal. You're not supposed to do that. The store was doing something very wrong, and they were giving advice to a newcomer who was struggling to have some of the things that he felt him or his family needed at the time that wasn't food. It could have been cash to pay rent, okay? So whatever need he had for cash, he decided that he would go to this store and do what the store clerk said that he always did and that he could do, and that was to take the food stamps and this food stamp card and somehow type into their computer system that he had sold them a bunch of dried beans and rice and food, when actually he didn't. He handed him cash. So somehow or another that transaction was caught on tape, which I think is interesting. Apparently every authorized grocery store or something that is authorized to accept food stamp cards can be monitored and I guess are. And when I say monitored, this young lady whose card it was got a letter, and it said, you need to come to the food stamp office on such and such date because we need some more information from you. We have a suspicion that you may owe us back some money. We need to talk about that. So the letter was, I'm totally paraphrasing. So she was real nervous and didn't really understand, having very little English and not understand the system. She was really surprised as to what in the world this letter could mean, and it scared her. Being new here, it's difficult to know where all of our lines are. In America, as far as I know, telling the truth is literally our culture. If you tell the truth and you try to explain your situation to a judge, to your creditors, to your family, to your friends, to your job, people are more likely to try to help you move through it, because we've all made mistakes. We've all gotten ourselves in sticky situations, and we all have needed help at some point in our life, and if we haven't, we probably will before we die. So I think that when we tell the truth, in our culture anyway, it tends to be what works out the best, works out in our favor in the end. In other cultures, though, sometimes telling the truth feels like the worst thing to do. I know that when I was in Indonesia, in order to maybe, go across this particular street to get to the other side, you would be stopped by some of the police there, and they wouldn't let you go to the other side for no really reason. They just said you can't cross, and they would say, what are you doing? And maybe you'd say, I'm going to go help such and such person, and they would say, well, you can't, and you would have to bargain with them. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say lie, but you would have to bargain with them, that you would give them cigarettes or money or alcohol or something. And this is the law. This is a corrupt law system, that if you would exchange these kinds of things, then they would let you across. And so you would have to decide if you were going to pay them to let you across, when really they weren't supposed to do that, but they were the authority figures carrying it out, and so you had to answer them. And so you would do things that you wouldn't normally do. In other situations, like maybe in refugee camps and stuff, sometimes you would have to really push and shove to be able to get food for every single person in your family. And maybe the only thing that they were giving out that day was beans, but that you're really trying to also feed your grandmother, who isn't able to walk up there and get the food herself, and only the people who can walk up there themselves can get the food. So you say you have somebody else in your household, or that that you didn't get yours yet or something, and you lie so that you can take grandma home food. Now, we don't know what we would do in that situation, but some countries, some places, lying is part of their life and their culture from being little bitty, and it's really kind of sad. I don't know that they necessarily want to, but it's these little things that you lie about because you're afraid that you're not going to be provided for, or that you need to do something, such as help your grandmother or get a job or something, in order to survive. So after so many years of being growing up in that, and it just being something casual that you do in order to function in life, I think you become very desensitized to it. And it's sad that a lot of the world outside of, or outside world in some of these third world countries have to go through that. But sometimes lying may save their life temporarily. But me and Christ, I do feel like God is going to help us as believers to move through all these difficult situations. I've never been in a really tough situation like that where I was facing life and death, and if I lied, would I? What would I do? I don't know. I want to say I would not lie, and I would trust God, and even until my death, I would try not to lie. I have a feeling that every one of us on this earth has lied at one point in our life. So, you have to kind of do your best at considering the fact that people who have come to America are coming straight from these situations, and they're trying to learn our culture. So when they're asked to go into a court system or something like that, they don't know for sure who they can trust. They don't know for sure if it is better to say, one thing over the truth, because they are afraid of what will actually happen to them because they don't understand. If it was easier for her to say, for somebody to tell a lie and to not have to end up paying all of this money that they already cannot afford, or go to jail and not be there for her children in a new country because she's in jail. If she really thought that's what could happen, she panics. And so I'm sensitive to when newcomers are here and they're trying to learn our system and our way of life. I hope that our country really can be a country where telling the truth is better. And it seems to me that it is. That in our culture, we seem to have an empathetic heart in America. We are more caring or more sensitive, I think, when we are told the truth. But that is not how it is in every culture, sadly. So this young lady trusted me to take me and tell me that something was going on with her card. I'm sure she could have been extremely embarrassed, because I could have easily assumed and thought that she was, trying to do something. But I know her, I've known her for a long time, and her family and her children, and I really feel like that this situation that she was in was something that they were persuaded and encouraged to do by somebody else who was running a store. Sorry, this particular other foreign group that was here owning one of these little stores. It wasn't like a main chain like a Kroger or anything like that, but it was a store that had somehow or another figured out that they could exchange the food stamps cards for cash assistance. Well, here's what happened. She was called to go in. I went in with her, and when we got there, I was in a big room full of cubicles, and I just literally went into this cubicle office with her and explained who I was, and that I knew the situation, and that she had allowed her husband to use the card, and she didn't know he was doing some of those things, and so she was embarrassed, but it was in her name and all this. Regardless of whether or not she, that she did this or not, and it was her husband over her, she was still financially responsible to have to pay that money back that was taken off the food stamps. It was not used for that, and it actually jeopardized whether or not she would get it again for several months. There's a waiting period and a process of payback and all this kind of stuff that they go through, which is extensive and a little scary for somebody to have to go through. But they literally, when I was so shocked. I was looking in the cubicle at like 2 or 3 laptop computers that had kind of like dual screens, 3 screens or something, and every one of them, she was literally this officer, and it wasn't really like a police person with all, it was just a regular lady. It looked like a clerk lady working and doing just average secretarial type, administrative, somebody doing her work, but she had the authority to follow these cases, and so they were investigating a particular store that was constantly handing people cash instead of using the food stamp card for food, and the store was in trouble. Okay, it wasn't so much that the people who were doing this were in trouble. They could be, but that wasn't really the point. They wanted to stop the store from doing this. So they had her husband there at the store on the camera using the card, and it literally showed the shelves with nothing on the shelf. Like there may have been a sack of beans, but there wasn't even $300 or $400 of beans even to sell. So they couldn't have sold, $300 of beans on this certificate, when on the shelf there wasn't $300 of merchandise sitting on the shelf. So it was really shady, and they got caught. And I was like, wow, they're watching you every time you swipe that food stamp card. I don't know if they do that everywhere, but it seems to me that if they need to, they have these people on camera to see that they're buying food, and that it is the person who is supposed to be buying the food. So they knew exactly who was spending the card. Why did you let this person use the card? It is still your responsibility to take. You handed him the card, therefore it's your responsibility. So I was shocked when I went into the office to go to this little meeting, and found out that they had her on, had her husband on the camera, literally right there. It's like, I'm watching this, and it was just so casual, and it was like, okay, there you are, guilty. This is exactly what happened. So, they were sensitive to her in the fact that she was going through what she was going through with a hard situation in her marriage, but they weren't so sensitive to the fact, what is the sun doing? But they weren't sensitive to the fact that that she had not been as responsible as she should have to know where her card was and where her card was being swiped and how it was being used. So I tell you that because I want you to know, and in some sense feel grateful and feel confident that the system is not perfect at all, but they really are watching the people who have these food stamp cards to make sure that they're actually spending it the way that they're supposed to spend it. So it's very difficult for somebody new to cheat the system when they don't really understand what's going on. They're also typically very afraid that if they do something wrong and it's a felony, so if you have 2 felony offenses, from what I know, if you have 2 felony offenses, then you could actually be deported and lose your rights to come here, to stay here, and lose any rights to become a citizen, because they have a pathway. If they go through a naturalization process to pass the testing, they literally have to learn some English. They have to take a test on our government and civics. They have to pay a big a fee to take the test and apply. And if they go through this process and they test and they write English, they speak English, and they read English enough to pass the test and understand and show that they understand our government and how it works, our rules and laws, and how how a law is made into a law, when can you vote, all those kinds of things. When they understand a little bit more about our government system, and they can prove that they do through passing this test, that's the naturalization test, they can become a U.S. citizen after 5 years of holding their green card. So once they've come here, a refugee can actually, after 5 years, come, have a naturalization if they study and pass that test. A lot of them don't do it in 5 years because they haven't had the time to study, because they're thrown into these jobs really quickly and everything. They don't have the time for education. So a lot of times they don't have that naturalization, and it takes them a little longer. Asylees can have their naturalization once they're actually holding their asylee approval for 5 years. So a refugee's time clock ticks when they first set foot on the soil, from my understanding, because they're already approved, and so that clock starts ticking. But once they get their green card, things move a lot faster for them. They're permanent residents, and then they have to apply for naturalized citizenship. So there's a difference. The green card's the same thing as a permanent residence, also the same thing as a 485, and there is a long, hard process to go through and get all of that, and then one day get your naturalization, which means you finally have a country that you can call home, that has in some sense adopted you, and you're no longer stateless, and you have more citizen rights and things. So I wanted you to know that food stamp and welfare system is not totally corrupt, where you may think that everybody's just cheating the system. They're being caught, okay? And it doesn't happen every day, and they have to pay it back plus some. Probably the system makes money on catching people. At the same time, yes, I'm sure that it is a struggle for us to really pay for all of these needs that everybody has. The UNHCR groups together with a lot of other countries, and you know how that works if you're a part of the United Nations. All of the United Nations countries comes together, and they work together to try to figure out, what do we do about these different countries that are facing war and terror, and how do we handle that, and all of these people that are running and fleeing. So each country that is part of that, I think, has a responsibility to do their share. Now that sounds terrible, like you have to take your fair share of the displaced people in the world. Well, of 65.7 million people that are displaced, only 20 million or something like that actually gets refugee status. That doesn't mean they get out. Of that 20 million, I think it's in the thousands, okay, probably. I need to go back and remember, but maybe 30,000, something like that. Crazy numbers in the thousands, not even a million. Not even, I don't think, a million of the 20 million get resettled somewhere. So that doesn't mean they all come to America, okay? They may go to Turkey, Africa, Jordan, Europe, Germany. They go to other countries that are willing to host them, and are trying to absorb and help the displaced people start their new life over. America takes less than 5% of that little 30,000 number that's of the 20 million that get refugee status, of the 65.7 that are displaced. So I want you to know they're not all flooding into America, so we don't have to be afraid of that everybody's coming here. But there are a lot of people. I mean, 1,000 people in a city, which is not happening. On average, 200 in Memphis per year. Refugees have come into America. That's not necessarily counting asylees, though, so that would be an interesting thing to kind of calculate. But newcomers are coming in a lot slower because of the new rules and regulations, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea because we're trying to figure out how we can manage handling it on the ground here. But it's not a good idea, you know, that we try to tighten it too much, because you've got people in really bad situations that need help. And I think as Christians we are supposed to be people who are open to help, but we have to be careful. We have to be wise, and we have to be led by the Holy Spirit in how we do this. So our part in it is, here is somebody in front of me and they're here. I don't necessarily have to ask, why are you here? You know, like, why are you hungry? Why did you get yourself into this situation? I don't feel like that is always the question, or if ever is the question we're supposed to ask. If somebody's hungry and I have food, I feel like I'm supposed to give it to them. If I have a way to do it, I'm going to. I'm going to use wisdom, because I realize there are people out there that may take advantage of me having an ability to help them with food or a little extra money or a coat on their back. I don't think that number is as high as what we in America try to make excuses for and not help. I think the number of people that would go to someone and ask for assistance and help repeatedly to the same person, I think that is a very low number, and such a low number that we shouldn't worry about it and suddenly not help them at all. As a matter of fact, if I am the 5th person, the 10th person, the 15th person that somebody asked to please help them to buy food, and they are using the food, the money or something that I might give them for alcohol or drugs, which seems to be America's worst fear, that we're helping them be a drug addict, or we're helping them be, an alcoholic or something. If I do that in the way that I feel like God wants me to do it, to empower this person to say, you are loved, you are made in the image of the Most High Power, you can be anything that he has put in you, a seed from the time before you were born, thought of you and put everything in you. You can accomplish something greater than where I see you are now on the street. If we can somehow let that person know how loved they are and how valued they are, if we were able to help them in a way that was not judgmental, or if we were able to help them fully with our heart and hand them, again, money or food or something, it could be the very last time that they ever ask, because somebody's got to be the last one that harvests this person in and shares with them the love and hope of Jesus, and really wraps their arms around them and loves on them and helps them to walk out of that, and empowers them to cling to the Holy Spirit and to God, to walk through this and be a new person, not on drugs and not on alcohol. We can't just assume that we just couldn't help them anymore. I think we have to be very careful with that. Somebody may have to love them better, and it may be me that could be the last person that has to feed them, because they never have to ask again, because they finally wake up. And sometimes it takes many times, many chances. I know I've needed a lot of chances in my life for grace and forgiveness and help. Every time I stumble, I feel like, I did it again. And I need somebody to give me mercy and grace and help me again and yet again. How many times have you probably disappointed God, or not done something perfect, maybe in His eyes? And He forgives us, and He forgives us, and He forgives us, and He gives us another chance, and He loves us, and He feeds us, and He provides for us, and He doesn't say, you again? So I'm here to tell you that Jesus loves you. He loves all people, and He wants us to be the hands and feet of Christ without all of these questions that make excuses. Thank you for listening. I'm Jamie.